On the show today, Merete Holm Brantbjerg, probably saying that a bit wrong. I'm sure she can correct me. She is the founder of Relational Trauma Therapy and a specialist in Hypo state. So we have a lot of people on about trauma, and I think she's a real specialist that's going to add a lot. We'll move beyond the basics, I think, today. So Merete, welcome.
Thank you.
Where are you in the world today?
I'm in southern Sweden in our cottage.
Okay. And are you Swedish? Are you Danish?
No, I'm not. I'm Danish. I'm Danish. I live in Copenhagen.
Yeah. Okay. It's nice to have a guest on who isn't from Britain or America. We try and keep it a bit broader than that. So that's cool. Mm-hmm. How did you get interested in the body and in trauma? And what was your story in getting interested in this area?
It started early. In a way, it started without me knowing it. But getting interested in the body happened when I was around 20. I had dropped a university career because it didn't work for me. I got a hint from one of my friends about a psychomotor school. I jumped into that, and that really turned me on. So psychomotor is really about, it's working with muscles. It's working with touch, but also with basic exercises, and with getting awareness of all the potential that lies in the muscle system. And that was a big thing for me when I was young. I was 20 when I started, and it really, you could say, it did two things to me. It helped me gain a lot more access to my own free life energy, sensuality. A lot parts of my body awakened that I hadn't known were not really on board. That was the very positive thing about it. The more challenging thing was that it didn't last. So I had this experience that I by now know is very normal, which is that you can relatively easily gain resources from working bodily, but the different thing is to make it sustainable. How do we keep it? How do we actually integrate it? And I didn't understand that by then. I just got it the hard way. You know, I gained resources, I lost them. I gained them, I lost them. This roller coaster process. And what I know today is that basic experience when I was around from 20 and my early 20s, it has really formed my work, because it both showed me a huge potential in working with the psychomotor knowledge and gaining resources, psychological resources that way, opening up patterns. But it also showed me that in a way something was missing. And that's what I have worked my way into by focusing on hypo states. That was a long explanation. That is how it started for me.
Diving straight into it. So when you say psychomotor, is that a particular school, or are you just talking generally? I'm not clear what that is.
Well, it is a general tradition. It's quite strong in Scandinavia, this understanding of that the psychological development is interlinked with the motoric development. So there's quite a lot of psychological literature in that, which is broad. And then there's this. Then there are some specific psychomotor schools. Some of them are within physiotherapy. This one wasn't. This school was in the tradition that's called relaxation therapy, or it was called back then. Today it's called psychomotor therapy. But that school grew out of the relaxation.
Okay. And this is a whole other tradition than say dance movement therapy.
It is a different tradition, yeah. They have some parallels. Both of them gained inspiration from some of the dance and theater folks. Now I have forgotten their names, but Stanislavski, and he inspired both of these paths. Okay. One of them went into dance therapy, and one of them went into relaxation therapy. Laban is another one. So you could say there is some similarity, but in the practical way of working, they are not similar.
And this is fascinating to me, is that the Anglo kind of schools have got very famous. And I came across something the other day that's huge in France and I'd never heard of. And someone said, "Oh, you're running the Embodiment Conference and you haven't heard of blah, 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 blah." And I was just like, I've never heard of that. And just because it's French speaking and it's all in French and it's done in France and, maybe 1 million people do it, but I'd never heard of it. And the same in Germany, there's schools that I've never heard of in Germany that just all in German. And then in Scandinavia, I come across a few. And it just feels like the only ones we know about are the sort of Asian ones that have come through America or the American ones, and very few of the sort of European ones ever get propagated more widely. Okay, let's talk about hypo states a little bit then. That's one of your specialisms, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Tell us, let's start right at the beginning with the basics and then maybe we'll go more advanced. What is a hypo state?
Yeah. I'll do it a little broader. You could say what is hypo and what is hyper.
Great.
Right? Because if we look at it from that perspective and you look at the body, you can say hypo and hyper. That's really underfunctioning and overfunctioning. And you can find that in many kinds of tissue. You can find it in the organs. You can find it in your blood pressure. You can have hypotension, hypertension. You can have it in your blood sugar, right? You can, if you look at it as just that either we're in balance, right? Or when we go out of balance, we can do it in two different ways. We can overdo something or we can underdo something. That's the very broad understanding of what hypo is about. It's something that's underfunctioning, right? And then you could say in terms of trauma therapy, the types of hypo states I'm specialized in working with, they are in the ANS, the autonomic nervous system. So there we talk arousal, and we can talk hyper arousal, which is what is by far still the most known, which is flight, fight, etc. It's all the active survival reactions. But then there's the whole other side, which is the hypo arousal, which is where it's not only that we looked at, but it's we go down into almost a hibernating state, which is called hypo arousal, right? So that's the hypo state in the arousal system. And then what I'm even more a specialist in is to work with the hypo state in the muscle system.
Okay.
Right, so if we think of this psychomotor potential I talked about earlier, then, and we think hypo and hyper into that and balanced, then you could say if we have a balanced muscle, then it's just full of life energy, it's filled out, we have access to whatever impulses and psychomotor skills and emotions that connect to it. But if we're not that lucky, and we aren't, there are places in our body that are not, where we don't have that full potential available, then how is it we lose it? We can do that in two ways. The most known is that we tense up the muscles, we control them, we hold back, then you get kind of a straitjacket in your body, a lot of pressure, right? That's tension, very well-known phenomenon, right? Hyper response. And then you also have this less known phenomenon, but just as normal, which is that we also lose the psychomotor resources through giving up in the muscles. They go flaccid, you literally lose the container function that a muscle is. The muscle holds a specific little part of your life energy and your action potential. And if the muscle fibers go flaccid, then that container for life energy and this specific expression of who you are isn't available anymore. Right? It's a phenomenon. In a way, we all know it. If you think of a handshake, if you think of different types of handshakes you have experienced.
Right. The handful of carrots, they call it in Sweden, the handful of carrots handshake. It's a wonderful description.
So you know this kind of handshake where you almost feel like your hand gets crushed. That would be a very hyper one.
Yeah. I had a military uncle who did that. Yeah.
And then you know a handshake that just feels good. just those contact. Then you have the experience of what a balanced, filled out muscle response feels like. And then you have these handshakes that are really not very pleasant, which are the ones that are flaccid, where the hand you're shaking isn't really present, or the energy isn't coming into the meeting. That's hypo response. So to get it, we all know it. From real life, we all know this phenomenon. So it's not the phenomenon that's unusual. The unusual thing is to focus on it and to conceptualize it. And with that, be able to develop methods that specifically address this phenomenon.
Got it. And how might listeners relate to feeling this in their own body? I mean, is it different than just when you're exhausted and collapsed? Is it, like when people may have experienced being a bit depressed and just having that?
Yeah.
Is it that, or is it something more than that?
So the words you use now are, they talk more to hypo arousal. When you say kind of depressed or collapsed, you talk about a very general sense of losing energy in your whole being. That would be something that happens more in your nervous system than only in specific parts of your muscle system.
Okay.
So the difference is, if you want to track hypo-responsive muscles, you need to get curious about which parts of your muscle system is not really filled out or engaged or awake. And the easiest way I know to help people do that is by comparison. Like thinking, is there first track your tensions, which is what you probably did right now, right? You have something that's not so pleasant in your neck. Yeah, you got a stiff neck. Yeah. So you track your tension, and that's, for most people, that's relatively easy because they bother us.
Right, you can feel that tension. It's like, my shoulders are stiff today.
Yeah, it's kind of out and stiff and too much and sometimes painful. So if we start tracking that and then invite just a little relaxation of that, just to slow down enough to be curious the other side. We could do that right now. You want me to guide us right now?
Sure, why not?
So let's just sit relatively symmetrical, both feet in the floor and both sitting bones in contact with the chair. If you like that, find support from the chair in your back. And then notice these places that are in a way working too hard right now. And you spoke about your shoulders and your neck, right? They would be typical. For me, it's typically my diaphragm. I hold a little too much in my breathing. Another typical pattern for me is I tense up in the outside of my legs. I kind of, in a way, I over-contain. It could be your back, it could be your legs. Basically, it could be anywhere. So that's one first step, just to notice and acknowledge that we all have this. It's going on all the time. And then invite in that we can just slow down a little. And with slow down, I mean settle into the chair. Focus on breathing out, so that we invite the body to land a little. Just come down a little inwards. Yeah, and then we can just notice, does that make a difference? And I notice it right away. It quiets down my voice. My voice comes from a little deeper place inside of me, which actually feels nice right now. I don't get less awake. I just get a little, I settle more. Do you have words for your version?
I'm a little sleepy today, so I'm definitely noticing it more when I come in. I've had a long day. But yeah, also a feeling of calm, pleasantness, solidity.
Yeah. But this thing of feeling that you're tired that's a very natural thing that happens when we slow down, then we suddenly start feeling some of the other parts of the body than the ones that are ready to be on all the time. So you may not be the only one. There could be listeners who are in the same club.
Oh, no, I'm just tired. That's okay. It's 7:18.
Yeah.
I've been working since
Exactly.
9 a.m. It's normal, you know.
Exactly.
It's a
Yeah.
12-hour day or
Yeah.
whatever, so 8 and 10-hour days. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's okay to be tired.
So
at the
then,
end of the day.
so that's a beginning, right, of just getting into a state inside where it's a little easier to start getting curious about what's not present, because that is naturally harder to track. It's easier to track something that's too much than it is to track something that is a little gone.
Yes.
But the experiment right now is to say, okay, let's compare. When we have first settled down a little, invited the body to relax as much as it's willing to, then we have a better position inside to start being curious about what's not really there. What has less energy? What is, So let's do that. We can compare sides. Is there a difference between the energy level in right and left, in back side, front side, in outside, inside, in upper part, lower part? So these big comparisons can be a way of starting to just get curious. Where in the body could this less noisy part of us be?
That's the interesting thing, right? We're looking for something which is less noisy. So it's
That's right.
So it's like, oh,
it's quieter, right? It's a little more withdrawn, often less noticed, very often less valued.
Okay.
Right? Less paid attention to. And the whole mechanism is to go invisible. So in a way, it's actually a success for the mechanism when we don't pay attention to it, right? Because the whole mechanism is that we can, in a way, get rid of something or solve something that is a dilemma for us by not sensing it, by taking the energy out of it. It's smart. It's a brilliant mechanism. But it has, unfortunately, it has some consequences because it leaves us with parts of us that we are not really in charge of anymore. Right? So do you get any ideas about when you make the comparisons? Do you get any information from that in your body?
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I've done things like this and realized certain parts of me are more alive, more active, more present. You know, for a long time, I couldn't feel my ankles. I had no idea why. You know, it was just like a part. I do a body scan in meditation. No matter how many body scans I did, I'd be like, I can't feel that part of me, you know?
So that could be one example, a specific part that's just more gone or less available, right? My example is typically this. When we talked about the tension, I talked about the outside of my legs. I kind of go, I tense up typically there, and it counterparts that the inside has more hypo response, right? And many of those patterns have that quality of two sides.
Right. So one part, you could top half more, bottom half less, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Or you could be more tense in your diaphragm, for example, covering up that you have less energy in your core. You could be tense in your surface and then more hypo-responsive in the depth muscles or vice versa, etc. So these two, they work together. It's not like it's either or.
Right.
Much more like they work together in defensive patterns.
You reminded me, just an image came up of like a cockerel that has like these big feathers on the top and then these little skinny chicken legs going on underneath, you know, like one part's very obvious and one part's...
Good picture.
Maybe I follow that some days, but the top half is much bigger than the bottom.
And more visible and looks stronger, right? And then there are these more hidden parts that are more invisible. And we have that polarity in us, and the ways we manage and the ways we survive have this polarity.
Wow, now I understand my love of chickens. Finally, we've analyzed it. We've analyzed my love of chickens. So as I'm understanding this model, it's not just like Stephen Porges' model of the whole nervous system going hypo, but like actually a bit more specific, almost like a neo-Reichian kind of model, that there's different parts with different things going on. Is that the kind of flavor here?
Well, you could say the parallel to Reich is that Reich also dealt with the muscle system. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, there's a parallel. When I talk about parts, or I talk about muscle groups, could be even more specific. The difference to Reich is that Reich was really primarily focused on armoring, mm-hmm. which in this language is hyper response.
That's the tension, right? It does the same thing of not feeling in a way, though, right? Because
it does, but it does it in a different way.
So it's not disappearing; it's disappearing through that tension.
Yeah, there you, of course, you also lose access to your life energy when you really tense up, but you do it in a different way, and you're left with two different problems.
Okay.
Right, with tension, you're left with that you're overworking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was coaching someone yesterday, and they were exhausting to be around. Just exhausting because they were so wired, so tense.
So tense, and you overwork. You really push yourself, and you lose access to a lot of nuances in what's going on inside of you because of all that tension. So that also comes with a cost. What doesn't happen is that you don't really lose your life energy, you just control it. Uh-huh. Where the challenge with hypo response is that you literally lose some of your life energy.
When you say life energy, what do you mean by that? That's just kind of an esoteric concept for the average person.
Yes. Well, it's a terrible concept, but what are we going to call it?
Right. Okay. It's a metaphor. It works for me. I'm just
this phenomenon that fills us up, that makes us feel alive, mm-hmm. that is the difference between a dead body and an alive body. What is that? What are we going to call that phenomenon? Mm-hmm. And different traditions would use different words. But basically, there is some juice, or there's a systemic tradition I got trained in that calls it the green stuff.
The green stuff, like the green juice. Stuff. Green juice. We're back to some vegan trauma therapy here. Okay.
But what should we call it? But do we have we could also say our full potential available?
Okay.
That's another, but it's just as broad.
Okay.
But if I go back to what is it we lose in the hypo response, right? We lose access to impulses, because every single muscle holds a potential for participating in skills we use for managing whatever, and our grounding, our centering, our reaching out in the world, our boundaries, our orienting capacity, etc., etc. All of these basic coping skills, they have a psychomotor aspect to them. It's very concrete that we turn our heads when we orient, and that we feel the soles of our feet when we ground, and that we have access to core muscles when we feel our center inside of us, etc. Right? So if we speak that language, it becomes more concrete what it is we lose. Because if these muscles go flaccid, then we lose access to these skills. Mm-hmm. Right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, do you think this is missed out in a lot of trauma therapy today? As you say, fight flight's talked about a lot.
Yes.
People do talk about nervous system shutdown. I do hear that from the somatic experiencing people. What do you think this work adds to the current kind of trauma narrative?
Today, there are more
trauma therapeutic traditions that include hypoarousal. If we go just 10 years back, that was still unusual. And you can still find traditions within trauma therapy that are primarily focused on hyperarousal, which would be the release of fight and flight and other active survival reactions, right? Where today the field is broader. Stephen Porges has had a huge influence on that. And different methodologies have developed that includes hypoarousal, also within the psychiatric research world. It's not only within trauma therapy, it's also in research. Researchers like Ruth Lanius include hypoarousal, etc.
Okay.
So that's not where I am. You could say I'm not the only one there. What I add is a very specific way of working with these hypo states. And I think that comes from my psychomotor background. Because if you're dealing with hypoarousal, you're dealing with a very big giving up. If you're dealing with hypo-response, you're dealing with a smaller phenomenon. And it's easier to train people to start being able to accept and include and make peace with the small giving up than to start with the big one. It's easier to build up resilience, to widen the personality, to start accepting these phenomena when you work in a very concrete way with the muscles. And I think that's particularly where I add something.